In this video, I will simplify media queries in CSS, help you understand what they are, why they are useful, and also show you how to use them. First off, what are media queries? Well, media queries are a fundamental concept and feature of CSS that allows you to apply CSS styles based on some device conditions. And these are especially useful in cases where you want to make your website responsive to different device screens. For example, look at this web page. It looks nice on a big screen from here to here. You have your 4 columns of product images. You have your heading as big as you would like it to be. But there comes a problem when somebody tries to view your web page on a smaller screen. Now you can see this still has 4 columns, and now your user has to scroll to the right to see the rest of your images. And also this heading and this text looks too big for this small screen size, but they're fine on a big size like this. And this is where media queries can be useful, because you can check if a device has this width or has this height, apply these styles. So let's look at the syntax of media queries. You have the media rule, and then you have the media type. This media type can be screen, which is your device screen, or it can be print. Print is useful for the print view of a web page. For example, if I try to print this web page, this is the print view of this page. Or you can specify all. After that, you can begin to declare your styles. All is going to apply to screen and print. So after you specify your media rule like this and you have your curly brackets, then you can apply your normal CSS styles. For example, for the H1, you can apply a color of red. This is the H1 at the top. It doesn't have a color. And now you can see that the H1 now has a color of red. But what is the difference between having color red here and having color red here? Well, this is where your conditions comes in. So one more thing you can add to the media rule is something called a condition. So you can say and then you have your condition. And this condition can be based on the different media features that you have exposed to CSS. If we come to this documentation here on MDN using media queries, you see the media types, all, print, screen. And then for the media features, you have these different media features here, and you can check when this feature has this value, do this. Now, instead of having media, all, and, you can just have media and your condition, and this is going to default to all and. So now for our condition, let's pick one of this media feature here, prefers color scheme. This media feature is used to detect if a user has requested light or dark color themes. So here for this condition now, I can say if the prefers color scheme media feature has a value of dark, you can see the values here, light, dark. I'll leave a link to all these resources in the description so you can check them out. This should have a color of red. And I can even have another media rule here where I say if it has a color scheme of light, then H1 should have a color of green. Now if we come back here, if we refresh, this has a color of red. Why? Because the color scheme I have set for my browser is dark. But now if I change this to light and I come back here, you see the H1 now has a color of green. So you can already think of this media feature condition as a way of creating different appearances of your web page based on the user's color scheme preference. I can also have my P here and say the P should have a font size of 1 rem if it is dark mode, but here the P should have a font size of 5 rem if it is light mode. Now if I come here and refresh, see the P has 5 rem because this is light mode, but if I come here and I go back to dark mode and I come back here, the P now has 1 rem. Now, instead of having 2 of these media rules here, you have the one for dark, you have the one for light. What you can simply do is just have the one for dark, and then you go and apply the default styles. So what do I mean by this? Well, first, let me move all of these close to the H1 and the P. Now I can take off this light mode one like this, and I can say by default H1 has a color of green and P has a font size of 1 rem. Now this is the default, and then here I can now say that if the prefers color scheme feature currently has a value of dark, then I want to overwrite the value of color for H1, which means no longer green but red, and I want to overwrite the font size property of P, no longer 1 rem, but let's make this 5 rem. So instead of having 2 media rule definitions, you just have one and then you specify your default. You can also do it the other way around. You can say if this is light, apply this, and then you specify your defaults here. But let me change this back to dark. Now if I come here, we're still going to get the same thing. This is dark mode. We have color red and we have 5 rem based on what we set here. And then if I go back to light mode and I come here, now we have color green and we now have 1 rem. But let me take this back to dark mode because I like dark mode. So this is the syntax for media queries, and there are a lot more features you can check here. There is orientation, inverted colors, prefers contrast, prefers reduced motion. You can check out all of this later to see more details, but 2 of the most common features you would be checking with media queries, especially for responsiveness, is width and height. In fact, you'll be checking width more often than height. Now going back to this our example, let me comment this part here and let me take this back to 3 rem and remove the color green. Now you can open your DevTools on your browser, and when you open DevTools on your browser, you can toggle this responsive mode. On my Edge browser, it's called device emulation. If I turn it off, this fills the screen. If I turn it on, here I can specify that I want a width of 500, I want a width of 800. So you can do that, and I'm doing this so you can understand how to use media queries for responsiveness. Now, for this to work accurately, also in your HTML, you need to have this viewport tag where you specify that the width of the viewport should currently be the device width and the scale should just be 1. If you don't specify this, you might get some weird behaviors when checking the width of your device in media queries. So now going back here, 4 columns looks nice on 1183. Let me expand this a bit more. So you can see that 4 columns looks nice. But when we reduce the screen, it gets to a point where 4 columns no longer looks nice. So for example, let's pick 1000. We can say that at 1000, instead of having 4 columns, I want 3 columns. Here in our container where we did display grid, currently we have 4 columns. I can now say media, what is my condition? Width 1000 pixels, and then here I can say that the container, just copy this from here. So I'm overwriting the grid template column property, and now I'm going to specify 3 columns. So now if I come back here and refresh, you can see that if it is not 1000, you get 4 columns. But once this is 1000 as the width, you now have 3 columns. See how media queries allows you to change all of these things based on the device width condition. But now there's a problem. If this becomes something other than 1000, you get 4 columns back. So how do you tell CSS that anything 1000 and below 3 columns? Now this is where instead of using width, you use something like max width. So max width means a maximum of 1000 pixels. So anything that is less than or equal to 1000 pixels, then you apply these styles. Now if I come back here, if I refresh, anything more than 1000, you have 4 columns, which is the default. But once it is less than 1000, you now have 3 columns. And now it gets to this point here where things are feeling a bit tight too, and you can have another media query. For example, we can pick 600. So we can say that here, anything less than 600 pixels, I want to have 2 columns. And now if we refresh, we have 600 pixels, anything or less, you have 2 columns. And at 350, you can declare again, anything less than 350 pixels, I want just 1 column. So once it is less than 350, now you have just 1 column. Now you also need to know that the order of all of these matters, because if I should put this 600 pixels above the 1000 pixels declaration, now watch what happens. So here you can see that once it is more than 1000, I have 4 columns, which again is the default. When I have something less than 1000, it is 3 columns, just how I want it. But when it is less than 600 pixels, see, I still have 3 columns instead of 2 columns. Why? Because even though we declared 2 columns here for 600 pixels maximum, because this 1000 pixels comes after this is going to take more priority. This is going to override this. So for the fact that currently 590 is also less than 1000 pixels, then it selects this. So you need to be conscious of the order, because the order matters. So now I've put in this back. If I refresh, now we get 2 columns. Remember I said this line is important. Now if I remove this line and I refresh, see we have 3 columns and it looks like things have zoomed in a bit. Now this is because on mobile devices there is this behavior where things might look zoomed in. So putting this just ensures that I don't want this to zoom. I want the scale to be 1 and I want the width of the viewport, the width of the browser to be the width of the device. Now putting this fixes this back. So here we have 2 columns, then we have 3 columns, then we have 4 columns. If you reduce it much, you have 1 column. So you see how we have improved this. Now let's do the same thing to our H1. So here we can also choose to take everything here, for example, and repeat it under H1. So you can choose to do it like this, or in this same block you can style your H1. So you can do it in different ways. You just have to be very careful of how readable things become and how far off things are. So here we can say for the H1, if it is 1000 pixels or less, I want the H1 to have a font size of 4 rem. And then we can also say that for the 600 pixels or less, it should have a font size of 3 rem. For the 350 pixels, it should have a font size of 1.5 rem. We can repeat the same thing for the P. The P by default has a font size of 3 rem. We can say 1000 pixels or less, it should have 2 rem. 600 pixels or less, 1.5 rem. And 350 pixels or less, 1 rem. Let's refresh. Now when it is more than 1000, you have all your defaults, 4 columns, the text are big. Once it gets less than 1000, you see the heading reduces, the P reduces. It gets less than 600, the heading reduces, the P reduces. It gets less than 350, and you see everything reduces accordingly. And by using media queries here, we have been able to create this responsive layout where users on mobile devices like this, or maybe on their tablets, or maybe on their desktop, they all get to have a good experience with your website. Now, of course, you can see that we have a lot of media queries here, and there are a lot of ways you can approach media queries to make them more manageable. And I also have a responsive layout with CSS playlist on my channel where I show you different ways you can achieve responsiveness without the need of having many media queries like this. I recommend you check out that playlist. I'll leave a link in the video description. But if you just want to use media queries, this is how you would approach this. Now here we're using max width, but you can also use minimum width. Minimum width means 350 pixels or more. So you can use minimum width 600 pixels, minimum width 1000 pixels. That is where the discussion of mobile first approach and desktop first approach comes in. Here what we're doing is we have our desktop first before we added media queries and then change things to fit mobile. But you can also choose to approach things from a mobile first approach where you have your styles for your mobile and then you have your min width, and then you can progressively go to the desktop. I'll create a separate video where I talk more about mobile first versus desktop first. Again, I'm just showing you that you can either use maximum width or you can use minimum width. And you can also use maximum height or minimum height. And coming back to these media features, you can check out different things here that you can do to ensure that the variety of users you have would get a good experience when using your website. This is how you use media rules to apply certain CSS styles to your element based on some device conditions. And just as we have seen here, this is very useful for things like responsiveness. So people with different devices can have good experiences with your website. Like I said previously, I don't use a lot of media rules like this to achieve responsiveness because there are other CSS features that I can use to achieve that automatically. You can find one of those videos currently on the screen where I show you other ways to achieve responsive layouts without media queries. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, share with others, and subscribe for more simplified CSS videos like this.